here we are. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, often overlooked, but inevitably important part of any startup's growth cycle, and that is learning to talk to media and harnessing that media for your own growth and your own impact. And this is the perfect place to be doing that. We are among friends, but at the same time here at TechChill we have over 50 media representatives here. This is a great time to get your foot in, start honing those skills. So we are joined here by some of the best. We have Thomas Macaulay from The Next Web.
Hi.
And Cate Lawrence from
Hello, how you doing?
Tech.eu. And of course, we also have the startup perspective represented here. We have Farah.
Hi.
From Hanx. So, my question for you guys, and we can start from the journalistic side, is perhaps you can tell us about what your media covers and what you particularly are interested in, what kind of stories.
You want to start?
Go
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, we cover European tech quite broadly, specifically startups. From my personal beat is primarily deep tech, and regionally I cover Baltics, the UK, Spain, and Portugal.
Mine varies. I mean, at Tech.eu, obviously by the name, we cover European tech news. Personally, I started off primarily working on IoT. That was my main foundation as a journalist back in the day. Then I started doing industrial tech, and then I moved to more sort of smart cities and then mobility, things from e-bikes and stuff. And now I do a bit of everything. So I think that tech is now vast and everything is tech. It's such a broad topic when we say tech startups,
Perfect. And Farah, Hanx is doing a lot of media visibility campaigns. First, I want to ask you, as a startup founder, what is the importance of having those campaigns? What value do you see in them?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're a brand. We sell consumer products, direct to consumer, both in retail and online. So it's super important to have a marketing budget and campaigns out there that can interact with the customer. We know that it takes customer about 7 or 8 times to see a brand before they actually interact or purchase. So campaigns are super important to us, but as a startup, we are strapped when it comes to cash. So we have to really think outside the box and think of ways that people are going to interact with campaigns without them being as expensive as outdoor advertising, for example.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we're talking budget, then when we're talking about interacting with media, such as with Cate and Thomas, that isn't a budgetful type of relationship. So what kind of relationship, what does that look like from a practical perspective?
So you're asking about a relationship that doesn't involve money? Is that
Yeah, essentially, how does a startup earn an article with you on Tech.eu?
Oh, okay. I mean, firstly, contact us. Reach out. We don't know everybody in the world. And give us a hook. What are you doing that's interesting? Why should we write about it? Why now is a very good topic, because I think there's a tendency with a lot of startups to pitch very early, which means that when they get some more news, we may not be able to cover it a second time because we've moved on to something else. So really, I think building a relationship from early on and just kind of being available. I mean, it could be anything from having short descriptions on your website so that if someone is doing some kind of listicle, they just want a few lines, or they want someone to maybe do a comment on a piece of news, having some kind of relationship. That's kind of how we work. We have our go-to people in a lot of sectors, and it's simply convenience because we're often on the clock, We've got to get something out by a certain time.
And so, Thomas, when you're looking at the European tech scene, what is it that you latch onto? What makes you excited and make you think, this is the story I'm going to write about?
Sure. Personally, it starts with the story. If a funding round of a big amount, that's something, but more about what the product does, why the people are doing it, what impact it has, something that stands out, that's unique about it as well. I think, I'd echo a lot of what Cate said. It's building that relationship on a personal level is important, because you can get like 100 email pitches a day. You're not going to read all of them. So if it's from someone you already know, or if they personalize it towards you, show they've done some research, they know it's something that you're interested in, that really make it stand out and much more likely to at least get a reply, if not an article out of it.
For sure. You mentioned funding rounds, and I find that in this region, in general in European tech news, funding rounds are a big cornerstone of the stories that are available and that get the interest of journalists. Startups don't always have these funding rounds. They're few and far between, especially these days. So I'm interested in, Farah, to hear some of your campaigns that you've been doing that are not related to funding, but that have generated a lot of media interest. Can you tell us about some of them?
Yeah, of course. So I co-founded Hanx with my friend Sarah, who's a gynecology doctor specializing in sexual health. So we had a hook there beyond the actual product and brand. Like, the reason why we launched is because we saw a gap in the market to serve women better. The reality is our competitor is a huge brand beginning with D, and they have millions of budget and spend. So we can't do what they do because we don't have the budget, but also we don't want to do what they do because they're serving the majority of the market, which are men, and we're thinking outside the box. So a lot of what we do tends to be guerrilla or, tongue-in-cheek campaigns that get people talking without it getting us banned from the tube or wherever that might be. So an example of a campaign that we did really well was we had a flower garden in Shoreditch in Box Park in London, and it had 2,000 flowers, and they had Hanx in the middle.
Hanx condoms.
Hanx condoms, which is our core product. And our products are vegan, biodegradable, kinder to the planet, kinder to the body. And so it was all about sustainable shag. And we didn't have to say that, but by having a flower garden and people coming forward and plucking the products and then realizing what they were, it was great PR because people wanted to write and talk about something slightly different. Yes, we are a sexual health brand, but doesn't mean to say we need to be boring and talk about STIs and man's pleasure. We can go beyond that. So we really try and think outside the box in terms of campaigns and think about how they would help a journalist speak, because like you said, you get 100 emails a day, right? How do you know which one to pick? And I think besides campaigns, if you don't have the budget to do that, or you don't have agencies that are willing to help, thinking about what different angles of a business. So Emily on our team, who sits in the marketing, is amazing at thinking about different titles and campaigns and ideas and serving that within the subject title of the email, so that at least within, if they don't open it, they can kind of get a grasp on what we're serving them. And then I think the other thing that's also helped is if there's an article that's already out there, then reaching out to the journalists and saying, just a heads up. So for example, BBC might say that STI rates have gone up. Emily will reach out to all the journalists and say, just a heads up, Dr. Welch is available for comment if you need it. So it's about keeping that rapport and relationship with the journalists, even if they've never written about you, just keeping them updated.
So that's great, proactive, talking to media when you see that there's a story that's relevant, and then you can comment on it. So saying that, here we are and we're available. And I think that this is something that we from our region can learn from. And here I'm also interested in what Cate and Thomas have to say, in that very often in our region, or at least in our country, our funding rounds are quite small compared to the other funding rounds that are going on in Europe. And when a journalist has to decide which 10 articles they're going to cover in a day, unfortunately or fortunately, you'll have to take the biggest ones, right? And those are the ones that win out.
Not always. I mean, I did one a couple of weeks ago, and it was something like, apologies, can't remember, 23,000 euros.
So how did they get your interest?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was just that it was a cool validation of some kind of tech, and the partnership was the significant one. It was kind of a partnership with someone that would help them build a customer base. So it wasn't just like, hey, we got this little bit of money. It was like, there's actually a deeper story here when you dig in. And so sometimes, I don't only do people that make, 20 million euros or whatever. It's often just that there's a story there that I think would appeal to the readers, because that's what we're all kind of competing for. We want people to read stuff, because there's nothing worse than you spend a while writing something and you just don't get the traction. So you're always sort of thinking about, what would people like to read? What's missing? What's a story that maybe is not getting enough attention, or that or a region for that matter, you know.
Yeah, very similar. I personally don't really care how big a funding amount is. It's about what the company does, what their story is, what their solution is. I mean, it might be useful as a news hook if you have a big funding round, or even if you just have a funding round to put them on our radar, but it's not going to be the reason that, at least
Yeah.
at my publication, we write about someone.
Exactly.
So there are ways to catch your attention, even if you don't have the big funding rounds. But let's talk about what not to do. So, Cate, what is a surefire way to get into your blacklist or to be sent straight to the trash?
I wrote a few things down. I have a poor memory sometimes when I'm a little bit tired. First thing is, don't send me an email and say, oh, this is what TechCrunch said about us yesterday. Will you write about us today? It's like, no, sorry, I won't, unless there's a spectacularly good reason, like I disagree with something they wrote, you know. Don't stalk us. There's a balance here. I mean, I know I mentioned the idea of building a relationship being important, but you know, it ranges. Like, I remember I had a guy in San Fran. I used to write a lot for San Francisco Press when I first started out as a journalist. He used to send me photos of his cats and photos of his cats at his wedding and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of weird. But it was kind of fun too, but it was really weird. But also, I think that we know the difference between someone who's just trying to kind of build a bit of a resource, or be a resource, and someone who's just being a bit ingenious. Like, if you suddenly like everything we've ever written on Twitter, or you follow every post, it's a bit strange. It's a bit, it's a bit inauthentic, I guess. What else did I say? Yeah, the other thing with that is two other things I would say would be, if we've interviewed you, the story cycle may be longer than you want it to be. For example, if you have some embargoed news and our big announcement is coming out on Monday next week, well, I should have that email already and have already organised that interview and stuff because, the news cycles are quite short. So timing is really important as well.
How long ahead of time would be optimal for you?
Maybe a week or two. Yeah, because we often have lots of concurrent stuff. Like, I publish something today while I'm at a conference. So we're travelling, we're doing other things. And we may be working on, 10, 20 stories at once sometimes.
But also for print, it's much longer, right? It's like months in advance.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like magazines and stuff, definitely.
Yep. So, Thomas, you also get a lot of pitches in a day, and we were talking earlier that you get a lot of bad pitches. So the question for you would be, what makes the good ones stand out?
Oh, I did actually. One of my colleagues was doing a training session on this subject with some startups that we work with. We run accelerators and co-working spaces, and yeah, just a few days ago. So generally, the vast majority of the stories that we write do not come from pitches, but I had just written one that came from a pitch, and I sort of see it similarly. A good pitch is almost similar, maybe it's a bit of confirmation bias, but similar to a good article. That, the headline of an article is the most important thing because it's what will make you click. Similarly, the subject line of an email, if that stands out. This one had a very good one to me because it was funding for Europe's space tech sector surpasses the US for the first time, which caught my eye because it really surprised me. Space tech is a subject that resonates with our audience and I find personally interesting. And then similarly, the first line of the email was really interesting. So as it is in an article, the top line, really important. And then because it was someone that I already had a personal relationship with, there was some trust there. And also very useful, he offered it as under embargo, so you could plan ahead, which also helped. Would have been even better if it was offered as exclusive.
Yeah. Do people know the difference between those?
I was going to ask, maybe you can take us through.
Yeah, so an embargo is basically please don't publish until this date, and sometimes it's a particular time. Don't make it 8 a.m. because I might not have.
Always is 8 a.m.
It's just mean. Sometimes we don't get time to write it till the day. That's just life. And a exclusive is where you agree to only give the main story to one publication. I'll be blunt. I know a lot of journalists that would say 100% that if you say it, yes, you can have the exclusive, and then you give it to someone else. the original person is probably not going to want to write about your company again. I'll be really pissed. Yeah.
I know there was a little bit of discussion on Twitter about if an exclusive then is just you are given the story, the main story first, and then once it's published, then we let other journalists
Oh, yeah,
know.
totally. It's once it's published, of course, you know, because other people may respond to it or they may have questions. You know, once it's published, it's all goes, you know.
Yeah. One thing, one perspective that I definitely want to touch on is the topic of agency versus founder. Now, there are some journalists that prefer having direct contact with founders. Some founders don't have time or don't prioritize it and prefer to work with agencies. Do you guys have preferences? And also for Farah, your approach.
It's always nice receiving from a founder. It sort of makes you feel a bit more valued, I guess. But the vast majority of them are not. Understandably, founders are very busy and they don't normally have time. So yeah, it's nice and it's appreciated, but it's not expected from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, I probably get more agency stuff because I think maybe because it's easier for scheduling purposes. Just when you're trying to organise interviews and stuff, it's much easier if you've got someone who's facilitating at their end. And usually with, I don't know, there's a real dichotomy with some people with PRs and agencies, but I find in general that if people know your kind of things you like to work on and they know the kind of topics that your readers like, which may differ from publication to publication, that can be it can be a very good relationship. It doesn't have to be as kind of negative as some people portray it.
And Farah, from a founder perspective, which have you opted for and what's your experience?
We've actually tried both. So when we launched, we used an agency who were amazing, and they got us some major titles, and that's where we learned about terms like embargo and exclusivity and timings. The reality is, if you are cash-strapped as a business, that can be quite expensive. They often take a retainer for a fixed number of months, so you really need to work with them to work on targets. So kind of having KPIs of 2 publishers a month, or whatever that might be for you. The benefit of having an agency is you have that dedicated resource that know how to speak to journalists and know what they'll want and craft a press release for you and take that burden away from you. And you're right, as founders, we're quite busy, and we also, it might not be our bag. Like, I'm ex-investment banking, I don't have a clue how to speak to journalists. The downside of that is budget, and also getting them to really sweat and work your brand, because they will have other brands on their books that they'll have to work to as well. So we've tried agencies, but what works really well is in-house, and admittedly we've been around for 5 years now, so we've built a bit of loyalty, some press that has helped sustain the brand, but in-house seems to work well for us because we've got a really amazing team that constantly reach out to the journalists. We have a network, and we're quite nifty with what we do. So, like, if we have a new product, we build a press release, but we don't just send the press release. We may also find their address and send them products, or we may stalk them on Twitter and know what their favourite chocolate bar is and send them that alongside Hanx.
Oh, really?
Whatever it might be that will really engage with them. And so I think that's definitely helped. There are some quick and easy ways of doing that. You can go on Twitter and type in journo request, and you can find what people are looking for. My view now as a brand that is 5 years in with a small and lean team and tight budgets, we do things in-house and it works well for us. We're also at the point where people come to us for statements and comments. Like we had an independent article that went out last week about sexual harassment in pictures, and that was a journalist that came to us, but we have to be generous with our time as well, really nurturing those relationships. Even if they don't write about you when you send them a press release, they may do in future, and sort of having that repeat and them seeing your brand and your name helps.
And I see Cate and Thomas nodding their heads. What does that follow-up, what does that relationship nurturing look like from a practical, everyday perspective?
I think it's just being responsive. I mean, even if you're in a different time zone, which, I work with companies quite often where their PR might be in the US, so the time frame is a little bit different. So just, thinking about that when if you're a cross, remote team, how do you manage those sorts of things? Sometimes we do have time limits for things, but there may be another way we can swing it. The other thing I would say, just clicked in my head after what you were saying about the budgets and it being pretty expensive if you're a new company. You don't have to use a PR to have us write about you. Honestly, I think one of the most basic things anyone could do, have a press kit and have it available, whether you have to sign up an email to get it or you can just have it online, and keep it current, because we're always looking for that kind of information, and it doesn't have to be just sort of your photo. It might be product photos, it might be descriptions, it could be announcements, just things that might give us some insights. Like, to give you an example, I did an article a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, on death tech. So looking at different kinds of companies working on things from wills to new human composting and all this, a bit of everything. Yeah, that sounds really weird, but yeah. And obviously there was maybe 8 or 9 companies mentioned. I didn't have time to interview all of them. Like, for a 1,000-word article, it's just not practical. So I went looking on their websites. What are they saying on Twitter? What's the discussion? What's the narrative here? Have they got some really cool pictures? Because you want pictures with this kind of stuff, that kind of topic. You need a good picture. So you can do that kind of stuff too.
Now, you mentioned pictures, and this is a topic that I wanted to touch on, and founder photos is always a topic of contention. And we work with a lot of startups, and sometimes we're told, oh, no, we've got some old photos, it'll be fine, it'll be enough. How important are founder photos or images in your decision-making as you cover stories?
You want to start?
I think it really depends on the publication. I feel we've got quite an unusual approach to images. We do a lot of custom images, partly because we don't have any subscription stock photo, so we have to either use ones that are Creative Commons, which means there's no license fee, or we just make our own. But yeah, founders photos we use, for sure. But I think there are other publications where they're a lot more important, and I think Cate's probably got some more insights on that side.
Yeah, we do use them, not every single article, but quite often. And look, it's not about you have to be photogenic. I'm not photogenic myself, I get it. But it's about having clear pictures. It's about having a picture in portrait size, which is like this way, not the other way, so we can put it on. We don't want an insanely large image because we have to spend a lot of time reducing it and making it so it fits in our CMS or whatever, CRM. It's also just, how do I put this? We sometimes have a little competition of the worst founder photos.
Oh, no.
And I think one of my recent ones was a company from, I'll just say Scandinavia. And they basically they were standing in front of a pile of rubble. And they were just kind of just hanging out. A couple of people had cargo shorts. There was no, you don't have to wear a uniform or anything, but we weren't really quite sure what it had to do with the company. But then in the corner, you could see they were standing next to this building, and it looked like something out of East Germany. I live in Berlin, so, and then to the side of it, you could see 2, old dudes standing there. And we firstly, the joke was, is that they're interns? But then we looked a bit closer, when you put it up, they were drinking beer. And so it was just some old dudes, next to this building site where they were doing the photos. So, yeah, don't do that. I mean, maybe we'll do an article on that. I know my colleague Dan, who is actually a professional photographer, he's written quite a lot for Tech.eu about good founder photos. And when we find them, we do always share them because we think it's a great thing. And like I said, you don't have to be good looking, it's not about that. It's just about having an interesting image. Maybe you've done something fun, I don't know. I think there was one with lightsabers that worked quite well.
That was the Latvian story. Hyperjob. I don't think it was lightsabers, but they were these long light
that was it. That was it. Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah.
And we actually went back and asked them for more photos and put them up. So, you might get an extra hit there.
Yeah. So good photos are an opportunity for even more press coverage.
Yeah, I think so.
So Farah, you had mentioned several of the campaigns that you had run. I'm curious as to, considering that they're not funding-related stories, there's something that you can do in between this big objective news. How do you and your team come up with these stories? And do you have a frequency of how often you're trying to get them out? What's your approach?
Yeah, so we do tend to have a content plan for the year, which involves looking at campaigns that we can do. Do they all happen? No, because it does come down to budget and what's happening and what the theme is. In terms of sort of creative inspiration, we love looking at other challenger brands in different industries. You know, we're not going to do the cliche of partnering with other brands in sexual wellness. Actually, Valentine's Day was a perfect example. That is the day that probably most sexual wellness brands would have posted about having sexy time and lingerie and roses. No, not Hanx. We partnered with a cereal brand and we posted a campaign where the cereal brand had a picture of their cereal saying great for spooning and ours with a fork and a condom that said great for forking. You can kind of gather what we meant by that. We also used it as an opportunity to promote vaginismus, which is an experience a lot of women face, and it's not often talked about or discussed. So we definitely, you know, we do have a rough plan in place, but actually if there's a moment or a theme or a topic that works well, we'll try and push the boundaries and not go with the stereotypical view. Now, we are lucky in that we have had agencies reach out to us where they're willing to do it pro bono because it's a passion project or they can do that. I know that's not possible for everyone, but in terms of creative inspiration, we definitely look beyond the status quo and we try and partner with other challenger brands to do that.
What seems to have really worked for you is that you're able to work together and work on socially relevant and important topics, and thus partner with organizations, associations, and give your product a higher meaning than just being a consumer brand. And so that seems to have been a good strategy. And I imagine that most startups are able to find a higher meaning or a bigger reason, their raison d'etre, to do that. So it's about thinking about that. And how much funding has your startup raised so far?
So we've only had angel investment. So Sarah and myself actually bootstrapped initially to get the product to market. And since then, we've raised £2.3 million over the last 5 years in tranches, but all through angel investment. And actually, a lot of our angels have been customers. And again, this stands testament to the brand, to the marketing. When we thought of our first product, we actually surveyed 2,000 women to find out what they wanted from a condom product, and the output was Hanx. But they were our early adopters, and actually, customers reach out to us and say, are you taking investment? Are you doing a crowd keep? And that's worked really well for us because they're also our micro-influencers and they live and breathe the brand.
So it's not many millions, and yet you're still doing national level campaigns. What kind of budget are you allocating? What for you does that, in terms of ballpark, is okay for you? Just to give us an idea of, even with 2.3 million funding, how much you're allocating to media-worthy campaigns.
Yeah, so 50% of our headcount is marketing. So marketing is hugely important to us because we're a brand and we're direct to consumer. However, it's really, we're still trying to figure out the mix on what types of marketing works and what doesn't. For me, I'm data-driven and I've got a commercial background, so I want to know where every penny is going and what return that is giving me. And, you know, channels like Instagram, Meta, that works well because I can put in £100, I know how much money we've made back from it. Things like PR, bigger campaigns, unless you can see a click go through, like we did with Daily Mail, it is a bit more difficult, but we know that's part of longer-term brand building. It's not going to be an overnight success. And I think the fact that we've been able to build a lot of press coverage over the last 5 years, when people now Google Hanx, you do see that. So it's a long-term game in terms of campaigns outdoor, but it's not cheap. And so, like, to give you context, we were incredibly lucky with an agency that came forward to work on one of our major campaigns, and they didn't charge for their time. So all we really had to pay for was the making of these flowers and the hiring of Box Park London. But I definitely think, you know, you see all these amazing brands and you see them, you know, in publications and you must think, oh, I've got to spend millions. You really don't. If you have a really strong, good community and you know your proposition and you believe in it, there are other ways to get your marketing out there, but there's not one right answer. I think it's a combination of short-term and long-term brand awareness.
Mm-hmm. Now, I should mention that this panel is for you, for our listeners, for our startuppers to grow. So if you have any questions for our panelists, then certainly we have a roaming microphone. So if anyone has a question, and so feel free to get involved. If there's anything at the moment, then nothing at the moment. Well, in the meantime, then, I would love to ask Cate and Thomas, if a startup would like to contact you and get in touch, what is the best way? Where can they find you? What's the best avenue for communication?
I mean, honestly, I'd say one thing you could do that kind of correlates to what we're talking about in low-cost, marketing, is be active on particular social media, and that may differ depending on who you're reaching. Like, for example, journalists are all on Twitter. We're all on Twitter. Yes, we use LinkedIn, but LinkedIn's become a bit of a kind of like, people writing about how great they are in their 4 a.m. yoga class or whatever. Gets a bit boring. Mastodon hasn't really taken off, so I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, so I mean, cultivate a bit of a bit of a conversation there maybe to start. That could be one option. Sending emails is the standard. Just send us an email. Don't try and call us. Don't be coy and just do this kind of like, I'm going to ping you on all of those different social medias, and something's going to bite because that's just annoying. Like, we're just busy. We're not we're not mean and ignoring you. It's just we have a lot of stuff to do. Like, there's not that many journalists anymore, to be really blunt with you. There's less of us than there is you, and less of us than PRs. So we're stretched quite thin. And the other thing I would say with that, really importantly, don't underestimate the time this takes. We are both very lucky because we're both in roles where we have, I guess, a stable income. The vast majority of journalists, including tech journalists, are getting paid per article. So all that time they put into responding to pitches and blah, 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 they don't get paid for any of that. So, just be mindful of time and respectful that, they're probably earning a tenth of what you earn sometimes in some situations.
I'd say, yeah, similarly to Cate, but for me it's always best to be contacted by email. Occasionally someone will get hold of your phone number and give you a call.
Yeah, don't do that.
Just drives me crazy. Don't mind being contacted on social media, but email's much better because I can sort of separate personal and professional life that way.
Exactly.
You mentioned follow-ups or annoyances. How is it okay to follow up? How many times? When is too much? When does it get annoying?
Yes, it's annoying. No, I mean, honestly, it depends why you're following up. Is it, I wrote to you a week ago, can you write about us? I might have just forgotten, I put it on a list somewhere and I didn't get back to it. So sometimes a reminder is, I'd probably say about, depending on the topic, of course, probably 50% of the reminder nudges, I will go, oh, okay, yeah, thanks for reminding me, I can do that, But conversely, if we interview and then you're sending me a message every day going, when's it going out? When's it going out? When's it going out? It just makes us feel stressed because, again, it's taking away that focus time that we need to write it in the first place. And secondly, it's just we don't always control it. It may be that if it's a prop tech piece about real estate tech, I published one yesterday, so I'm not going to publish it this week, maybe. Maybe it's next week or the week after. Or maybe there's other things going on that you're not seeing. In some publications, it could be, for example, there's, I don't know, some kind of sponsorship thing or other stuff going on. Or it can be just, you've done a big piece where you've interviewed 3 or 4 people and you need, a month or 2 to just really consolidate it. So it varies, yeah.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Thomas?
Yeah, again,
Yes,
similarly.
no?
I feel like I'm sort of repeating a lot of what Kate's saying at the moment, but that's probably because most journalists have similar experiences. And
yeah, totally.
Yeah, sometimes you get 5 follow-up emails to something that is totally irrelevant, and that will leave a bit of a black mark on the sender's name, unfortunately. But if you've committed to publishing something, then it's expected that they'll follow up, and that doesn't bother me at all, obviously.
I thought of a couple of other things to mention just because they might be useful. The first one, what was I going to say? Remind myself. Oh, yeah. I'd be clear on who you're sending what to. For example, a lot of people will send me their pitch deck to their VCs or potential VCs. I don't know if you want me to see that because there's a lot of information there that you probably don't want me to know, but it happens quite often, and it's a little
I like that.
problematic.
Send a pitch text, for sure.
Yeah, it happens quite often, and also be very mindful of where's your audience? Like, why are you pitching? Like, are you trying to get customers? Are you trying to get investors? Like, that helps us a little bit as well, because we may be coming at it from a very different angle to you. Maybe we're fitting it into a different discourse or a contrasting something or other. So yeah, be very mindful of those sort of things too, that you might have this great interview with us, but we might give you something very different than what you thought you'd get. Yeah.
So I have a list of questions that we often have to refute with some of our startup clients, and I would like the people to hear it from you. So if I ask you, can we see the piece before you publish it? What's the answer?
No. Yeah, we've got a strict rule about that. It's always asking for trouble. Yeah, I mean, if it's with an interview, obviously, I'd often offer them to get the recording of the interview, in case they're worried about the words being misrepresented. But copy approval that's what we call it when they want to see a piece before it's published, and it's just, it's a flat no.
Yeah, I mean, to be very clear, if it's an extremely complex kind of tech that you're covering, and that it might be something I don't know that much about personally, like maybe it's like quantum physics or something, I didn't study that. I may say, look, can you just have a quick look, just to make sure I'm representing the message right, or I've explained the concept in a way that's, accessible to our average audience, who are not quantum physicians, is that the term? So sometimes, it depends.
Yeah, no, that's the same. If it's a technical subject, then we might seek some clarification, but I think it's always at the journalist's impetus rather than the company's.
Yeah. It's not something that can be expected.
I find it is often expected. I find that with German companies, actually. German companies often expect that you're going to do it, and then I have to say to them, well, no, we don't do that, as a matter of course.
Yeah. And what would you say to a startup that says, oh, but can you put in these links?
Oh, man. The worst one is when you've written something like, it still happens to me now. I wrote something like 8 years ago, and they're like, can you link to me in your 8-year-old article? And I'm like, yeah, I don't work for that publication. Like, no. It's really annoying. Like, if you want us to link to maybe of course we're going to link to your website, naturally. Maybe LinkedIn if there's a very good reason, but like, there's got to be a reason. Otherwise, why would we? You're just giving us that ping back, which is,
Yeah, there have often been times when we've had articles written about us and they've accidentally, they've forgotten to put in a link. And I don't know I think it's reasonable to message them if they've missed a link and suggest
totally.
it. And the worst they can say is no, right?
And that's one thing I'd be very clear about. If we've made a mistake, just tell us. Like, there are some people and they're like, they contact your editor and they're like, oh, there's a typo. And it's like, just message me and I'll fix it. It's fine. Like, sometimes it just happens. You can, I don't know, you've probably all done it as well. You run things to Grammarly once or twice. It doesn't pick up on everything. Just tell us and we can usually fix stuff. It's not that big a deal.
And then the last question in my list of tricky questions is, can we make changes in the article after it's been published?
If there's an update that sort of progresses the story, if we're writing about a new story in particular, and then there's a further development, then we would do an update. But at least for my publication, we'd put a notification of that update at the start. So it would say, like, update 29th March, 10:05 p.m., an extra £500 million being invested into this company. But in terms of actually, like...
I wish.
Yeah.
Great update.
But yeah, in terms of like just making changes, editorial changes, no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I do updates. It depends. I mean, it's got to be something pretty significant, or if it's something different, maybe there's another angle, but we may not be able to write about it straight away. I just thought of one thing too that used to happen to me a lot when I wrote about sort of crypto stuff, back in the day. People would actually offer me money, and quite large amounts, like 10K.
Oh.
Can you write about me? And
10K?
I know, right? You know, and you know, if you're getting paid $100 to write something, you're like 10K, you're like, oh man, but yeah, no, we don't do that. So yeah, just don't do that kind of stuff, dude. Don't be sneaky. Don't do dodgy stuff because it's going to hit back at you at some point. You know.
It's 100K though.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the highest amount you've had?
If there's a private island or I don't know, margarita maker or something.
What's your minimum bribe?
As they say, everyone has a price.
I don't know. I've never thought about it. Yeah, I mean, it's just that be you know, authentic in that sense. You know, we're all trying to do a job. You've got a job. We've got a job. You know.
So no bribing journalists, essentially, is what you're saying.
Unless they're really, really life-changing sums of money.
Yeah, what's your price?
Yeah.
No one's reached it yet, but I'm not that valuable, clearly.
Yeah, or you know, a very special trip to a tropical island, perhaps. I don't know. That might work.
You heard it here first, folks.
I don't think you could allocate that in your marketing budget, a bribe trip.
No, I don't think we.
Yeah, I don't know what you'd put that down for the receipts for your accountant.
PR. Retainer.
Like flowers, right?
So we have our last few minutes. We have opportunities for questions. If anyone has thought of anything, I see a hand way back there.
Yes, thank you. Hi. My question is for Cate and Thomas. As you said, a lot of stories you cover are not coming from PR pitches. Mm-hmm. So how can my company, the VC for example, become a reputable source for you? What would make you think about my company when you need a quote, comment, or any information?
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it depends a little bit. I mean, yes, of course, you can pitch us, naturally. But I think it's more about, is there something that's maybe significant to your sector that you have some insight about? Maybe it's expanding our knowledge, because, you know, we don't know everything. We're pretty good in deep dive in some verticals, but our knowledge is this much. So it could be that you've got a different perspective. Maybe someone's published something recently and you're like, no, that's crap. This is what's actually happening in this sector or something or other. Those kind of things are very useful. It's also just being, maybe you're using LinkedIn, maybe you're publishing some thought leadership or something like that, that's you're sharing, maybe that's one option. Or maybe you've got other people building a bit of a buzz around your company. Having a community of people that are talking is more likely to get our attention too.
Sure. Yeah, I'd agree with that. If there's a specific area of expertise, that's great. For me personally, I've got a list of contacts that I'll reach out to for certain stories. So maybe if it was, I don't know, an investor based in Latvia and I was working on a piece about a Latvian startup or a Latvian vertical, then to have someone I can reach out to who's got expertise on that would be great.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm. And how do those relationships come to fruition? Do they approach you at an event, send you some email follow-ups?
All of the above. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday. We were waiting for our lunch in the taco line. And she was working on a startup in like industrial waste management. And it was kind of interesting. It's like, don't see a lot of women in that space. And so now we're like, yeah, we can write about that. Something different. So it can be just, have a chit chat. Like, I don't know, I went through a stage while, I don't know if this is a Germany thing, because I live in Germany, and Germany people are not always as chatty. Australians talk a lot. And so often I'd go to an event and the startups would all kind of talk to their colleagues, and the VCs and the media and the marketing people would all talk to each other. So yeah, you can approach us. We're all pretty approachable people, I think.
Yep. Thomas, do you have any preferences on how potential sources can establish a relationship with you?
Yeah, I mean, just reach out, drop me an email, thomas@thenextweb.com. If it's interesting, I'll follow up. But it's good to just be on the radar of the journalists, I guess, as you said, for seeking expert comment on future stories. If we know who you are, we might not write about you immediately, but may do so in the future.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Is there a very quick question left from the audience that anyone would want to ask? No, it looks like we've been covered. Well, in that case, then I think that we can wrap up this panel, and thank you very much to our panelists. And you can approach Cate and Thomas at this event, as well as any of our 50+ media representatives who have the white media badges. And thank you very much to Farah for sharing your experience.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.